Hello everyone and welcome to this Nintendo Life episode 155. My name is NBZ and I don't have anything witty to say, you know? Sometimes you just enter into a podcast and you have all these expectations, Bally, you know, people are there being like, how are you going to start this podcast? You're going to say something cool and fun? And then you're like, no, I just don't have anything. There's really just nothing's coming today. So I'm just going to be honest about it, you know? Honesty is, of course, the best thing to
Sometimes
do.
you just got to get it done.
Yeah.
You hear? We're going to do a podcast. That's what it's about.
Exactly. Straight-laced, straight up. And talking about it, here is you as well. Bally, you're here. You're the co-host of this podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very good. We are. It's a little weird because we're recording quite early, but this happens occasionally, and
it does.
It's fun.
You know, it's one of those things where it kind of, to some degree, shocks me that we have been consistent for like 6 years, and I think there was one time where we were like a day delayed on a Monday episode of a podcast. But aside from that, we've pretty much put out a podcast every second Monday without fail. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, if you're a good planner and you know what's coming up and you organize, miracles can happen, friends. They really can. Scheduling, it's a smart thing to do. So here we are in our appointed time to discuss the world of video games, and Nintendo video games more specifically. So that's what we are going to do for you all. So let's kick things off, Bally, by telling us what we're going to be chatting about in the show today.
First segment, we're going to be talking about the games that we have been playing. Second segment will be an emails segment. And for the third segment, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about ports coming to Switch. There's been a lot of them recently, and we just wanted to have a chat about what might come in the future, what we hope for, what we predict might happen, and just check in on that.
And just the state of it, I think, right? Because ports are a contentious issue for some, and, you know, the quality of them and the studios that are doing them and things like that. And we're at a point where two huge ones have just come out for Switch, which I don't know at the start of this system's life cycle I ever in my wildest dreams imagined that The Witcher 3 and Overwatch would be on this platform, but they are. So I think it's just interesting to look back on the last couple of years or so of this system and how it got to the place it is, as well as where it's going to go. So yeah, that will be a run of show for you. Let's get right into it then, Bally. Let's talk about video games, those lovely things that we like to chat about, and tell us what you've been playing.
I just wanted to play a short game for this podcast, basically, because I've just got so much on my plate. Still moving into the flat. Work's very busy right now, and I was like, I want to play something short. I want to talk about it.
When life is big and long and taking all your time away, you just need something that you can you know, quickly just hop in and out of.
Exactly, and there are some long games coming up. So a game that you've recommended to me a long time ago, it's on my list, let's just say, is Ink, which came out in 2015, I believe.
Yes.
And you talked about this game back in episode 46, I think it was, and I went back and listened to your thoughts on this game.
It's fun how we can do that, isn't it? We just, you know, capture every moment of our discussions on video games.
And it's a really neat little game. For those who don't know, it's essentially a splatformer where initially platforms are invisible and your double jump splatters paint, which makes the platforms gradually appear, and then every time you die the paint stays in place so you know where the platforms are for next time.
Exactly. So you're kind of building the level as you die almost. And
often you talk about like hitboxes in a game like this, where this game, I don't think they're really like the visual style almost is the hitbox. Like the hitbox doesn't go because you play as a block and the enemies are blocks and the other things that you can hit are blocks and spikes. So the hitbox feels very accurate in that sense. Like there's nothing...
Right, because, you know, you are a square and you would imagine that a hitbox is just your square around you.
So in a post-Celeste platforming world that we now live in, I think that it really turns the heat up on games like Ink when you go back to them. So for me, the platforming initially felt like the horizontal movement in particular was very exaggerated, and it felt like the weight that you moved was very like it would be hard to turn your weight back, and not in like a Donkey Kong Country kind of way, which kind of feels right. This kind of felt a bit weird because obviously the block is quite a small unit. You would expect it can kind of shift back and forth a bit quicker. And I found that initially this was quite frustrating, and at times I was almost fighting the mechanics. But then as I got to the later stages of the game, and you have time to practice the mechanics, and it is a very short game, although it did still take me about a good 3 hours, maybe even 3.5, 4 hours.
That is insane to me as someone who
some of the later levels I found really tough.
It gets hard, but like as someone who sat there for like maybe an hour and played this whole thing.
Well, maybe I played like an expanded version, who knows, but
I doubt that, but sure.
But I eventually did get a lot more used to the controls, and it works. It's fine. Fine is maybe selling it short. It's a good game. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that it had controls that were akin to Meat Boy back when I played it, and obviously this was a while ago. But in my memory, it felt pretty good. And of course, I have gone back and retroactively played stuff like Super Meat Boy in a post-Celeste world, and my thoughts were, actually, maybe this doesn't feel as good as it used to, but maybe that's also because I'm jumping into the game without the context of starting it over from the beginning, relearning it, and things like that. If I'm just jumping into a random level that's really hard, I'm not going to get a good idea of actually how it felt to build up to that point. So I think maybe I would retract some of my thoughts in terms of that for Super Meat Boy.
Definitely. And like any tough action game, whether it's driving, racing, platforming, I think that you can get into a groove through muscle memory and training.
Absolutely.
And
to be frank about it, when I first started playing Celeste, I didn't like the controls. I didn't like the movement. I actually thought it was kind of bad. No, to be brutally honest, I wasn't fully vibing with Celeste in the first level or so. It took me a while to acclimatize to the feel, because it does feel quite different to something like a Meat Boy. So it was a little bit of an adjustment period of like, okay, the dash works like this, and this is how it's going to kind of work with momentum. So yeah, I mean I get that notion of jumping into something and kind of immediately being like, well, I don't know how this feels. I would say the same of Dead Cells. When I first started playing Dead Cells, I was like, oh, this is a bit too weighty. Like, his jump feels a little too low, but the game is designed around that, right? And eventually, once you get into the groove of it, you start to understand why it feels that way, because the entire level design is built around that particular feel.
Yeah, and it's easy to feel like there's a right and a wrong when really, in reality, it's just Celeste has dominated people's taste of what they define as right and wrong in a way where people think, oh, it doesn't feel like, and I was saying this to you over WhatsApp, oh, it doesn't feel like Celeste, it's bad, but actually it's just different. And I think people, especially people who are big fans of 2D platformers like we are on this show, like, have now held Celeste at that standard. And as you said, going back to Meat Boy, and this game does actually, I would agree, does feel quite close to Meat Boy, and especially in that sideways movement.
Something we can agree on, though, Super Mario Bros. 3 feels bad.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, you compare these to 2D Mario generally, I would even argue, and like 2D Mario feels good, feels fine, but like...
Well, I don't know, like, there's the strand of Mario that's in Mario Maker I actually think feels really good, comparative to those older games.
Because they've subtly changed it. They've not... that's the one thing they've not stuck to.
Like, the physics are more in line with the new Super Mario Brothers games, which I think generally feel a bit better than the older ones.
They do, but compared to the sort of the Splatformers, it does feel very slow and sluggish in a way that very skiddy, like slidey, like Mario slides a lot. Not even Luigi length of sliding, but just Mario. But yeah, but we can talk in depth about different styles of platformers and things. And this one is good, and we just need more 2 to 3 hour experiences of all sorts of genres, in my view. Like, they're like short experiences that I think work really well on a platform like the Switch, that are cheaper on the eShop, can go on sale. In a world of so many long games, it is good to have these shorter games, and I certainly like to check in with them every now and then. I think it does what it says on the tin very well. Like, this game, it's a cool concept. It iterates on that concept.
How did you feel about the idea of the paint and how it worked? Did you feel like it got old at a point in time, or did you enjoy the way that it evolved the concept and how it kind of, elaborated as it went on?
The concept doesn't evolve a ton, I would say, and some of my frustrations with the later levels were actually similar to a game like Meat Boy, where the enemies are like homing missiles that just feel
yes, yeah.
And that's the thing that although obviously homing missiles aren't technically RNG, they do mean that every time you're replaying the level, it will be slightly different, and that's
right, because it's supposed to be down to your dexterity as opposed to just muscle memory to some extent.
Right, and that's very different to a moving platform, which while yes, it is different, the platform moving is not controlled by you, whereas where the missile goes is, and as a result,
sure,
the muscle memory training for a moving platform feels very different and more fair in my view.
It's just consistency, isn't it? You can more reliably do the thing versus when it's less out of your control.
Exactly, and so I personally like that consistency more. And a game like Celeste, I think, focuses a lot more on that consistency. And this almost the Celeste version of a homing missile is just Badeline, who will like follow you, which is different, right, I would argue, to a homing missile in that it is more precise, and I actually prefer that precision personally, where there were parts of Meat Boy where I was like, oh god, the homing missile got me because I just jumped at this angle and it doesn't, whereas getting caught by Badeline feels more fair.
Well, it's your fault because you made that path, right? That you have an evil shadow following exactly where you went.
Yeah, sometimes getting caught by that missile feels unfair, even though obviously it's not RNG and you have controlled where that missile has gone. But that's just a small gripe, and I think, hey, if I was making a similar game, I'd probably put in the homing missile mechanic because it's neat and works. It makes the game hard. It's just I personally prefer something chasing you systematically rather than a homing missile. But that's my only gripe, and generally it was very hard, but I liked that. I was expecting that, and I did conquer it. And yeah, it's a neat little game. It's on the Switch. I recommend sticking it on your watch list, people, and then when you see it go on sale, it's definitely worth picking up. I don't think it was too expensive. I think I picked this and...
I mean, it's really cheap to begin with, I think.
Yeah, I picked this and Goose Game up when they were both on sale for a combined total of like £8 once you factored in my discount that I'd racked. I think I'd racked up about £4 or something, so it felt very cheap at the time. So yeah, Ink, I'd definitely recommend.
Yeah, which I played initially when it came out on PC, and then later on, came to this.
This is why I've played more Switch games than UMBZ, because all of the indie darlings that were building up over the years have now just been dumped on the Switch, and I've been working my way through them. And
like, this is an example of a game that nobody talks about because it is really small. Like, it was Patrick Klepek was the one who turned me on to it years ago, and it. I don't imagine this game is done particularly well, and it is one of those games that is hidden on the Switch eShop, and if you don't know about it, you're not going to find it, and it doesn't really stand out amongst a crowd in terms of its artwork or anything, so you'll look at it probably and not really think too much. And I think that is the one shame of the Switch eShop, is it does surface stuff that is popular, so like Hollow Knight and Stardew and all that stuff's going to do well, but there are things that are actually really good that kind of get buried under a lot of the shit. Because there is a lot of shit on the eShop that just isn't of quality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The eShop is good for that absolute top tier, which I guess games like Hollow Knight, Stardew, Celeste absolutely are. And then Ink, which is arguably like a bit more B tier and just, a much smaller game.
I feel the same about Mextermination Force, right? Like, I wanna shout from the rooftops, like, hey guys, play Mextermination Force, play Ink, because no one else is going to talk about those games. And I think that we, as a podcast, are kind of able to focus on some things like that we definitely, as curators to some degree, can be like, hey, these games are really good, you should check them out.
Yeah, and we kind of almost know about a game like Extermination Force through Gum and Clive, and then I guess we knew about that because we listened to Radio Free Nintendo, so it's like there is a knock-on effect of like more niche podcasts or gaming outlets just talking about more niche games, and then those people who are making the niche games make sequels to those niche games, then you talk about them, and like there's a bit of a snowball effect, and it's very, I hope that we as a show can be part of that snowball effect to shine a bit of a light on some of the smaller stuff, because I think it's important. Yeah, definitely for sure. Cool. MBZ,
good stuff.
What have you been playing?
So I've been playing Fire Emblem at the gym. That's kind of the thing.
This. It's just hilarious.
So let's return to a couple of years ago when we talked about playing Ace Attorney on my 3DS at the gym. because that was like, I was testing it out. I was like, can I, I get bored at the gym pretty easily if I'm on a cardio or something. I'm like doing a bike and I'm like listening to a podcast, but like, I'm not content to do 2 things at once. I need to do 3 things at once.
Are you honestly not content doing cardio with a podcast? You need more than that.
Well, yeah, I am to some degree, but like, I feel like I can be more efficient with my time. And so I was like, okay, so what if I do like incline walking, up a hill, and also play Fire Emblem at the same time? And it's easy for me because I'm going through Black Eagles again because this is minor spoilers, but I think a lot of people know this by now.
Yeah, I agree.
There is a secret 4th path in this game, and it happens if you choose Black Eagles. So my initial run, I didn't do it because I couldn't find it, so I never got to experience that. So I did one particular run, but I had a backup save file that was about 15 hours into the game, so it meant that I could just jump into this without having to restart all over from the beginning again for a new path. So that's what I did. So I jumped into this and blazed my way through the rest of the kind of pre-time skip era because I'd already done it, right? Like I'd already seen all that stuff. I didn't need to. So this was the nice thing about playing this at the gym, was it gave me a way to do a lot of grunt work that I wasn't necessarily looking forward to doing, right? Which is just playing this exact same thing I've already done. And because of that, I can turn off animations, play really quickly, fast forward through cutscenes, skip all the support conversations I've not seen, and you would be surprised at how fast you can just bomb through that game when you do that, right? Because so much of Three Houses is in the monastery downtime, figuring out what do you want to do, where do you want to go, listening to support conversations, cups of tea, watching cutscenes. Like it is a slow game, and I like that about it, right? I like the languid pace. I like that it is really getting you to invest in the students and invest in spending time with them. That said, I didn't want to do that when I'd already done the exact same thing, right? It's slightly different with my...
You don't want to do it 3 times, 4
no,
times.
Well, or 4 times, but it's slightly different with Blue Lion and Golden Deer because in those scenarios, I want to see all the support conversations, so I am taking a bit more of my time, and also they're new characters, so I am more invested in, I don't know what to do with Ignatz, or I don't want to know what to do with Raphael, so I'm trying to figure out my paths for them. Where should I tutor them in and things like that. So it's slightly different with the other paths, whereas this one, it was just like, well, I'm just going to bang through. And so I did. And the Switch, I have to tell you, going to the gym, playing the Switch, it is the most perfect system for doing this ever made. Because you can just leave the screen there and you just have one Joy-Con in each hand. And yeah, you get sweaty, but your Joy-Con, you can easily put them down, you can wipe them off. Like, it's really not that hard to use them in that way. So I really enjoyed doing that. I still am doing it to some degree, though a bit less so because I'm now post-time skip. I'm maybe 3 or 4 chapters in there. So I'm getting close to the end. But it means that I've not seen this stuff before, so I am just finishing off some support conversations I haven't seen, as well as, getting the cutscenes, getting the story from a different perspective, and finishing it up. And yeah, it's certainly interesting. It's been interesting in terms of the differences, and in terms of there is a lot of map recycling in this game, I've noticed. A lot of the paralog chapters, one in particular, there's a lava chapter that's both a paralog chapter and then later on is a story chapter, and it's really weird because if you've done the paralog chapter, you've already been to that exact same map, and then you arrive at that same map in the story and they're like, oh wow, this place looks dangerous, and I'm like, motherfuckers, you've all been here before. We did this part.
It's lava, so you know what it is.
No, but it's literally the exact same map though. Like, it's not even that it's just the same environment, it's the copy and pasted map. So people are like, they're like, oh, this place is dangerous, watch out for this, and I'm like, motherfuckers, we did this before, you already watched out for it once. So it's a bit of a contrivance in that sense, and I think that because their ambitions of having 3 different paths, they didn't have the resources to have completely unique maps for every single scenario, so there is reuse going on. And there are locations that you go to in both of these paths that I've done so far that are slightly repurposed. So like you'll start the map at a different end that you started it last time, and the layout of the enemies will be totally different, and sometimes there'll be chests, sometimes there won't. So I think it is interesting to see the differences between those versions and how they change. And And yeah, there is a lot of the story that is very different. There's some of the gameplay stuff that is similar. So I would say like it's not completely unique, but I haven't played the other parts yet, so I'm going to have to wait and see and kind of make a judgment on that as I go. But yeah, I put another 20 hours into that thing just because I find it very easy to play Fire Emblem, and time just kind of melts when I play that game. So yeah, I'm going strong on that. I'll probably finish that up soon. But the game that I have spent the most time playing, and it is a game I am now fucking in love with, and everyone was talking about it this year, and I was like, yeah, I should probably get to that at some point, is Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire, a game that probably, given my likes and dislikes, is not something you would expect me to get super into. A roguelike card game, right? Obviously, we both really enjoyed SteamWorld Quest earlier this year, and I remember when people were talking about that game, they were saying that it's kind of a good gateway drug to something like Slay the Spire, because SteamWorld Quest is based around having cards in a deck and using them in RPG battles, and Slay the Spire is pretty much that. The only difference is that it's a roguelike, and so you start each run, and every time you start, you have very basic cards. You get 5 attack cards and 5 defense cards. And it's simple, right? So I think the thing that makes this so approachable to someone like me, the part of card games that turns me off and why I never got too deep into Hearthstone, despite like really enjoying Hearthstone a lot, playing quite a bit of it, is that notion of building a deck and having a strategy that builds across every card, how many versions of each card you're having. It's like when we did Pokemon trading cards, like building a synergy, making sure you have enough of this, enough of that. And like with Pokemon cards, there were certain rules that we thought were smart, which is have 3 of a basic type, then 2 of its evolution, and then 1 of the third evolution, to round out your deck or whatever, to make it so that you're more likely to get basics, but there is the off chance you get the second evolution, and then there's the off chance you get the final one. But with Hearthstone, I didn't understand it on a broad enough level to be able to confidently feel like I could do that. And I think a lot of people tend to do the thing similar to when I played competitive Pokemon, is, you go to Cerebi, you go to Smogon, and you're like, okay, what's a good team? I'm just going to make this team and use that one. A lot of competitive Hearthstone, online would be, I'm just going to take the team that this guy made because he knows how to make one, So that's what always turned me off, because for me, like, I always like making my own thing, and if I don't feel like I'm good enough to do that, I'm not going to want to go through the hassle of doing so. Slay the Spire is different because every time you fight an enemy and beat them, you get a new card, and it gives you 3 options. It's like 3 cards here, choose one and you keep it. And because it is that slow build of building your deck 1 card at a time, you slowly start to build up these strategies, and you slowly realize, okay, if I take this card, I already have this one in my deck, that could work really nicely because it has this certain effect that means I'll get an extra turn, or I'll get extra damage, or more energy.
And do you keep that deck for that run and then it goes, or you keep the deck?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, right.
So, and I think that's the real fun thing about this game, is that every run you will have a completely different strategy.
Because your deck is being forced to change all the time.
Yes, absolutely. And as a result of that, because these cards are random, because you are kind of taking them, there'll be runs where you're focusing on one particular thing, and you'll ignore other cards that don't necessarily fit with that synergy, right? So there was a run I did the other day, which was, it was all about getting as many low energy cards into my hand as possible. So just to set up the base mechanics of it, you get it every time you start a fight. You'll draw your cards. You'll have, depending on the character, because there's multiple characters as well, so that's another layer, but you'll get 5 cards in your hand, and you'll have 3 energy to start with. And so all the cards have different costs associated with them. So it's similar to Hearthstone, which I know you've not played, Bally, but it's this idea that, in Hearthstone you have this mana pool that you draw from, and it slowly goes up over time. This can change, but for the most of the game it's 3. So like, you'll have a card which costs 0, so you don't use any energy. You'll have a card which costs 3, so you'll use up all your energy on that turn. But there are obviously cards that can reduce that, and things of that nature. I guess, SteamWorld Quest did this as well, didn't it, right, with the cogs?
Right.
So you understand that. I think that game was far more about building up a huge amount and then using them, versus this is much more set in its way. So you have three.
Okay.
So this deck that I was building was based around having as many low cost cards as possible. So I wasn't expending that much energy, but I was doing lots of damage. And one of the things you can get is shivs. So shivs are 0 cost cards that just disappear as soon as you use them. And so it was built around this one card that every time I attacked in a turn, it would do 8 damage. So the idea would be have all these cards that give you loads of like really low energy attacks. So I'd have a card that gives me 2 shivs, and I'd have a 0 cost attack. I'd have a 1 cost attack. I'd have another one which would give me another energy the next turn. So you would have these turns, and I also had a card which was a power card that when I played it in a match, at the start of my turn, it would add a 0 cost shiv card to my hand. So I built up this deck where essentially I would come across the card that did 8 damage every time I did a hit, and I'd do like 7 attacks in one turn, and then I'd play that card, and that card would then do 8 damage 7 times back to back, which is just stacking up loads of damage. And, Mark Brown did a video on this about synergies and how they work and the way Slay the Spire does them. And there are so many synergies in this game. It is unbelievable the satisfaction you find in stringing these things together and just figuring out a strategy that works on that particular run. It's really, really good. And you get in this mindset, you really get hooked on figuring out the best approach, like what order to play your cards in. The game is really based around the system of enemies will do debuffs to you. You can do stuff to them as well, but it's at its core value, it's about doing damage and building your own defense. Because another thing that this does, which is similar to Into the Breach, Into the Breach was all about showing you what the enemy was going to do the next turn. This game does that as well. So it will tell you, hey, buddy, the enemy is angry. It's going to do 11 damage 4 times to you next turn. And you're sitting there and you're like, oh, shit, because your health bar has to last through this entire run. So you can rest at places, so you can go to campfires and it will heal you up, but those are kind of sparing. They're not that frequent. So it's really about mitigating as much damage done to you as possible. And there are lots of different ways to do this, right? There are defense,
like healing cards, or
not healing cards. There are potions that can heal you sometimes, but it's more about using cards that give you extra defense. So There is one card that doubled your defense. So you could have 2 cards that are defense cards, which will give you 10, but the enemy's going to hit you for 20. But if you have a card that doubles the amount of defense, you play your 2 defense cards, then you play the double defense card, and now you're taking no damage because it's just hitting your barrier, essentially. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of the order in which you play is so crucial as well, because it results in turns where if you don't do that in the correct order, then your strategy is just going to fall apart. So it really engages your brain on a pretty deep level, actually. It's one of those things where I was listening to podcasts while playing it, but I very quickly realized I wasn't taking anything in at all, because my whole brain energy was focused on thinking about each turn and also trying to think ahead and be like, okay, well, if he's defending on this turn, more than likely he's going to attack next turn, so I need to make sure that I keep defensive cards in my hand. And usually what will happen at the end of your turn is you'll discard your current hand and you'll draw a new one. But there are these things called relics, and you'll get relics from defeating bosses, from defeating elite enemies, which are harder enemies, and relics can be good. They can have negative effects to them, but more often than not, they're really helpful, and they will give you like little added bonuses. So by the end of a run, you should end up with like 10 or 12 of these things, and they each stack upon each other, so they'll all add to your broader strategy. So if you're going with a defensive deck, and it seems like that's what you're building towards, when you get the chance to choose a relic, you might want to choose a relic that is thorns, which means when the enemy hits you, they take 3 damage every time they hit you, as a defensive measure. Or you could take a relic that lets you keep your deck at the end of your turn. So if you know the enemy's going to do a big attack and you don't want to discard all your defense cards that you know, for some reason, because it's a card game, there's an element of randomness to it. So if you've built up a bunch of defense cards, but that particular turn, you're like, well, I need to do damage this turn. When that turn ends, you don't want to waste them, so they end up in your discard pile. But if you have the relic that lets you keep them in your hand, then you can be prepared for the next turn. So that one in particular, I found really helpful. And there's just so many of these things, and because there are 3 different characters, there are 3 different decks of cards. Each character has their own inbuilt relic they start with. They all have particular strategies that they're kind of based around. So the Silent, which is this green character with like a skull mask, he is based around doing poison damage. So a lot of it is just over time building up poison, so you slowly kill your enemy. And so if you're going for that strategy, you really want to pick up cards that are all based around that, versus the Defect, which is even more unique. He has this ability to take charges, and so he has lightning charges, dark charges, frost charges, and each of those do different things at the end of your turn. So lightning will do 3 damage to the enemy, frost will give you 2 defense at the end of your turn, and dark is really interesting because the longer it stays within your set, it will build up 6 damage each time until you evoke it. It reminds me of Melia from Xenoblade Chronicles. Now, I know you didn't play as Melia in Xenoblade, but I think Melia was mainly based around building up all this energy and then expending it. And so the idea behind this dark card, I had this strategy which basically won me my first run. So I have finished a run in this game where there's a particular card that will evoke that particular element the number of times that you have energy, right? So if you have 3 energy, it will do it 3 times. So I built up this dark energy to where it was going to do 42 damage if I expended it. But I played the card which was expend it X number of times, and I had full energy on that turn, so it expended 42 damage 3 times in a row, and I killed a boss from like half health. Wow. And that felt fucking amazing, right? Like, you get these moments that you have come upon yourself just naturally over thinking about what cards you have, how you can combine them together to create results. And but it is just remarkable. It really is incredible, and despite it being a roguelike, it's one of those games that I just want to keep playing. Yeah, I just want to do another run.
What do you think of the roguish parts? Because everything you've described just sounds fantastic, and I appreciate you initially said you like the aspect that you essentially have a new deck each run, but otherwise does it feel like a huge blow when you lose a run, or are you ready for the next one, or like what's that aspect like? Because obviously I'm personally not the biggest fan of roguelikes, although there have been ones that I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, I think we both feel similarly in that aspect of, we get to a point often with roguelikes where we just give up on them. We don't want, we enjoy them for however long they last, but then we don't end up finishing them probably because it requires a lot of effort and, resources and time. And what I will say is that it took me about 6 hours to get my first win in Slay the Spire. So it isn't necessarily that long. It does feel gutting. Last night, I lost at the final boss with the second character that I was playing as, and that felt like a fucking punch in my face. But I then wanted to start a new run. I instantly wanted to go again because I knew that the deck I would build would be totally different. I'd come up with a completely different strategy. I would try and build on what I had learned, to do something completely different. And I feel like eventually that will probably wear off, right? There's only so many strategies that you can do. But at the moment, because it is slowly doling out cards to me, like when you beat bosses, or when you end a run, you unlock 3 new cards, and those 3 new cards then go into the rotation of potential cards you can find along your way. So you're constantly expanding your potential. And as a result of that, each run does feel like it gives you something new every time you go through it. But I think really,
I was going to ask, what do you keep between runs? You keep some cards?
Every run is a fresh deck. So you start with the same 10 cards every time you start. So that is never changed. The difference is that the options you have for cards are wider. So
that's a bit like Into the Breach, where you're essentially unlocking different units.
Yes.
But essentially each run you almost take nothing. I mean, you take a single pilot between runs, but it's quite harsh. Again, like Bad North, you take literally nothing. It's just to completely restart the game.
Yeah, so you do take a little bit, but for me, like, the thing you take really is your own knowledge. Like you take your own experience and you're like, now I feel like I have a better understanding of how these systems work, and now I feel more confident going into this next run, what I should do differently, how I should build a strategy, and all of that stuff. I am smitten by this game. It is truly remarkable. It really is one of the best things I've played this year. And it's crazy because it is, as I said, it's a roguelike card game. But that's just really vibing with me right now.
Nice.
It's available on Switch. I actually got sent a review code for it on Steam, so I haven't played the Switch version, but I know that version is good. It runs well, and obviously touchscreen controls lend themselves really well to a game like this. So I'd probably say if you're going to play it on Switch, do it that way. Because card games, I don't know. It's weird that Blizzard haven't put Hearthstone on Switch. Not that people would be
Blizzard,
psyched
boo.
Yeah,
boo.
I mean, not that anyone
They're
wants
bad.
this to do anything
They're
currently,
naughty.
but yeah, it feels like a system that is built for a game like this, and yeah, I mean, I could just keep talking about all the eccentricities of it, but it is a complicated game, and I think a lot of what I've said is probably going over people's heads who haven't played it, because it is a lot to take in at first, but once you understand the systems, once you know exactly what's going on, it is amazing. It really is.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm still playing it even though I finished it. I think this is similar to Into the Breach to me, where I'm like, I beat Into the Breach and then I kept playing
When
it.
do I stop?
Yeah, and I think one of the things it does is, like, at the end of my first run when I finished it, it showed like a thing where there was this door and a seal on it, and one of the things was glowing, the color of the character that I had just beaten it with, and there are 2 other locks there, so I need to beat it with these 2 other characters, I think, and then there will be probably some other thing unlocked afterwards. So yeah, it's really interesting. And the other thing I'll say is it's all about choosing your own path through as well. The way that the game is structured is this big kind of parchment map that it shows you, and on the map there are icons. So like there'll be a monster, there'll be another icon for like a really powerful monster, there are campfires, there are merchants, and there are question marks. And these question marks could be anything. They could be a fight, they could be a weird encounter where you come out with a really powerful relic, or they could be something where they curse you and you get screwed over really badly. So you have to weave there's multiple paths to the top, and you can choose your way through. So before you start a run, I always like look through and like, okay, I'm going to go this way, avoid that guy, but then I'm going to get this campfire so that I'm prepared for this. It has that level of divergence within, choosing your path through it as well, which I think is a pretty unique, interesting take. If you can play this, then play it. Slay the Spire, it's really good. It's really fucking good. So yes, cool. Well, that said, let's take a break, and we'll come back after this break with some of your emails. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second segment of today's show. It's the second segment, and that means it's time for your emails. I must say, our emails they're kind of running low. We always need more. I'd really love you to send in some more. Please send them to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That's thisnintendolife@gmail.com. You can also post emails into our Discord server, link in the description or on our Twitter account. Jump in there, post a question, and we can read it out on the show. So, our first question this week is from Erdem, who's from Hong Kong. Hi guys, first of all, a quick thanks. I'm a relatively new subscriber, but I've been really enjoying your content. I just wanted to ask if YouTubers or other people creating content about video games have ever made you feel anxious about your own gaming practices, especially in regard to completion. I find that while it seems everyone on YouTube etc. finds the time to experience so much content, I am constantly missing out. Currently, I am in a month and a half through playthrough of Final Fantasy X on the Switch, where I have played the game for around 40 hours. Basically, I would like to play more, but I feel I never have the time. However, this never deters me from buying games, as I am always tempted to pick up new games on sale, resulting in an ever-growing backlog. I missed the Wii U generation completely because of financial reasons, but now I have near enough every Wii U game worth having, mostly unplayed. To cut a long story short, is there any advice you can give me to help me experience the medium I love more? Is there a way to stop the growing anxiety of missing out while it seems all around you get to experience them? Apologies for any grammar errors or if my message sounds a bit rambly. I'm writing while waiting for my bus in Hong Kong. Thanks again.
Well, thanks very much, Adam, for the email. I have to say that your English is far better than me speaking another language. So well done on writing in. That's very good. There's lots of things to take here. And having been a YouTuber myself and having made Let's Plays and things like that, I think it's an interesting question, right? In terms of when I started doing Let's Plays, the thing that people did in Let's Plays was they 100%ed games, right? Like it was almost an unspoken rule. When Nintendo Capri-Sun and Chugga Conroy and all these people, Josh Japson, all of them did Let's Plays, they would just get 100%, right? Like it was a full playthrough, and that's what you would do, which resulted in me, when I started, doing 100%. So I played Lost Winds and got 100% in that game. And showed all my progress. Yes, Twilight Princess is coming.
And you're 100%ing it.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing, right? Why is my Twilight Princess Let's Play, however many years it's been going now, why is it continuous? Because I made the boneheaded decision when I was however old that this is how you do Let's Plays, that you have to 100% them and nothing else is allowed, right? And
I think it's close to 10 years.
Yeah, it's getting there. It's the march of time. It really is a thing. So in that sense, I do feel like when you're talking about YouTubers and content creators and people who do that, one thing you have to keep in mind, right, is that a lot of these people, this is their occupation, right? It's their full-time job. And so if you're trying to have equivalent playtime to them, it's just not going to happen because they have the hours to invest into games to do everything, right? And to some degree, it's not necessarily worth doing everything. I think something that we have come to terms with doing the podcast is, there are games that we'll sink into and we'll spend lots of time with, but if it gets to a point where we're like, okay, I feel like I've experienced what I want to experience here, I'm fine putting a game down, right? Like I don't feel the personal compulsion anymore to 100% things. I don't think I ever did personally, but when I was making stuff, when I was doing YouTube videos, when I was doing Let's Plays, I felt like I had to keep to a standard, which is a stupid thing, but like that was it was, as I said, an unspoken rule of the community. So it's weird, right? Because Final Fantasy X is an interesting example. That game in particular on Switch it includes like the European super bosses, and that stuff was stuff that was cut from the American version, and it was like stuff that you had to grind for hundreds of hours in order to be high enough level to do. And you'll find people on YouTube who do that. Full complete walkthroughs of FF10 exist where they do all the super bosses and they show you how to do it, etc. But you shouldn't hold yourself to that standard, right? Like I think there's a middle ground here, because I feel a similar way. You know, you're always picking up new games on sale. There's always a backlog. There's always going to be stuff you're missing out on, right? Bally played Untitled Goose Game. I haven't played that game. I'm out of the conversation, right? I'm out of the loop. I don't know what people are talking about. I'm playing the Slay the Spire. Bally hasn't played that. He's out of the loop. So you're always going to be unable to be in every conversation and always going to be unable to engage with all the video games being out all the time, because unfortunately the reality of the world currently is there's too much good stuff and nowhere near enough time for it. So I think it's hard, but it is one of those things that you just need to let go of, right? Like, take a deep breath and be like, I'm fine. I'm okay with like just enjoying what I enjoy, and if I want to get to something, I'll get to it. But if not, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's very easy to assume that a lot of gamers play games like video game journalists, when in reality, video game journalists have a lot more time on their hands in order to play a lot more games and talk and be part of more conversations.
Well, I mean, to some degree, right? A lot of them are doing unpaid overtime on weekends to actually get games played, you know, and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I mean like full-time video game journalists and like, you know, people, podcasters and commentators. And
right.
I think even for them, there will be blank spots in games that will have want to have played this year but still can't, because ultimately, as you said, MBZ, there is just simply too much out there. So yeah, I've found it really tough this year to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, like, you're currently moving into a new place and you've got a lot of stuff at work, and you know, a normal person who just, you know, lives life regularly, they'll have time in the evening to maybe watch something or whatever, but it's not. I think it's because you probably feel more of the pressure because you're on a podcast talking about video games, so you feel an obligation to play stuff, and then you're like, oh no, I'm not playing enough, which is, you know, it's fair, but...
And I think that's always something we have to remember, is that on top of like working or whatever, we are doing a podcast which takes time that isn't playing video games, in the sense
exactly,
that, like, we are still on top of like numerous things. So but that being said, there's definitely a lot of advice we can probably offer in terms of how to like predict what you're going to play and how you're going to play it. And we're certain, like, we've logged all the games that we've played on Backlog Club. That gives us a nice list. Backloggery, sorry.
You did this in, I think, our Patreon episode.
Website Backloggery, nothing to do with Backlog Club. And I also have like a Google document where I have games I plan to play in the year 2019, and I will shuffle that list constantly. And it's two mini lists. One list is games to play in 2019 that didn't come out in 2019, and then games to play in 2019 that are coming out in 2019. So it's just like and that's kind of like linked to what we do on the show with like Game of the Year, but being part of the conversation and processing everything. And on top of that, using websites like How Long to Beat and factoring in this idea that, right, that game's going to take 6 hours to beat. I must set aside 6 hours at some point to play that game, sort of thing. And I think it is just remembering that regardless of how busy or non-busy you are, a year is 365 days. If you played 1 hour a day, which I appreciate is a lot, but for some that's quite a small amount, but it's important to remember that is still 365 hours of video games, and that if you attributed that to some of the top releases of this year, you could play a real good chunk of them if you could afford it financially to play a huge chunk of those games with 365 hours. So like, it's totally doable even when people do have very busy lives, but it is about how you factor in that 1 hour a day, say, for example. And I think that I personally have struggled at times, but then there might be like a weekend where I'm more free and I'll just dive like 6 hours and 7 hours into a game and catch up a bit. And getting into a gaming groove is important, because I've found coming back from work, sometimes it's just like, the last thing I want to do right now is like play video games. Like, you do need it's a different type of energy.
You want like a more passive experience, and
definitely.
For me, you know, YouTube is a thing that I just lean on all the time, and YouTube is my very, very relaxed, like super passive entertainment, and that's what I will do more often than play a game. Is I'll have YouTube on, and that is, it's an activity that I can kind of do while also maybe being on my phone, while also just, getting up and pausing it. It's very flexible, and, podcasts are similar in that way, that they're so flexible and easy to absorb and be involved with. And some games are like that. Like, there are certainly games that I feel that way with, online multiplayer games. I feel like because you don't have to pay attention to the sound or the story or whatever, it's a much easier entry point, and that's why I end up playing a bunch of Overwatch or Apex Legends or whatever, just because I want to watch a podcast on one monitor and play a game on the other and kind of relax that way. So, it's just, I think it is obviously to do a lot with mood as well, but it can depend on the game, right? There's games like Fire Emblem that for you want to set aside 6 hours to play.
I found it really tough to get back to that game, partially because I do find Fire Emblem quite hard generally, but also I like playing a lot of it at once, where I like to get into a groove like I did with Conquest earlier in the year, and it has been tough, especially with the launch lineup that we've been talking about for 2019.
Yeah. I'd say another thing is just what to play. Like, that when you get a big backlog, there becomes an anxiety of what do I even choose, right? It's like people talk about the endless scrolling on Netflix. It's you spend half an hour scrolling, and that's time you could have spent watching something, and yet you just
that's why I think lists are so great, and it's almost like a this sounds crazy. It's like a Mary Kondoification of like your video game collection, even if it's digital, or not even if it's digital, but even if it's on a streaming service, or or on something like Xbox, what's it called, Game Pass, right? So it's like identifying what are actually the games I want to play. Let's write them out in a list, okay, and then let's try and order that list in terms of what I want to play the most. And it might, as you say, it might take a long time to do that process, but I think for me personally, I love the mental space of knowing this is what I'm going to play, this is the order I'm going to play things in. And because for me personally, and I do this throughout like my working career as well, like I like to write a list, and I say I'm going to work on this, and then if someone asks me to do something else, I have to say, right, am I doing that thing or am I doing this thing? Because I'm not doing both of them, and like I'm not a great multitasker in that sense. Like, I do like some focus and a list and being methodical about things. So I just think for mental space, it's quite important, especially for me personally. Yeah,
absolutely, and I do think that planning is an important aspect. So I've been reading a lot of books this year, and I always set aside time in the day to read. And because I'm reading really long books, it can take me a while to get through them if I don't have that dedicated time to do so. So the book I'm reading at the moment, 600 pages, I'm reading 60 pages a day, or trying to. And that is maybe an hour and a half. Like, it could be longer at points, but like hour and a half, maybe a bit longer. Usually in the evening, I'll sit down, I'll grab my book, and I'll just read it. And that is slow progress, but it's progress, and it will happen over a period of time, but it will happen. And I think it's just carving out those pieces of time in your life to do that. Because if you don't, if your constant anxiety is, oh, I want to play this, but I don't want to play it now because I have to commit time to it. You just have to get rid of that sometimes and be like, no, this is a game that probably requires me to play a bit longer, but I'm going to play, 2 hours of it. It's like when Spider-Man came out last year and I was coming home late and I was like, okay, it's like 9 o'clock. I have to go to bed in 2 hours, but I want to play Spider-Man for 2 hours. Like, I'm just going to dedicate my time to that. I'm going to love doing it.
And at the end of that 2 hours, as much as that 2 hours might have gone very fast and you don't feel very refreshed, at the same time, I do like that sense of accomplishment. Like, I've got further in that game. I enjoyed that, and like that was worth doing. Like, it's almost like hobbies can take a bit of energy in the same way that work can, but at the same time, that means they're still worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not really a short way of saying any of that, but yeah, I think it is. It depends on the type of person you are, right? Because like, I don't do the thing that Bally does. I don't write down lists, and I don't order things I'm going to play in, because I feel at some point I just kind of play whatever I want to play. Like, there was, recently I just spent time playing Apex and Titanfall yesterday, and I'm not going to talk about that on the podcast. It's not really done anything meaningful, but I just enjoyed doing it, and I just wanted to do it. I just wanted to play those games, so I did. And you just sometimes have to do that. And sometimes it's like, okay, well, I've spent this hour and a half playing Titanfall 2, a game that is irrelevant now, and like, is this going to be valuable time to me? But sometimes you have to be like, well, you know what? I don't have to efficiency my entire life all the time, you know? Like,
yeah, not everything needs an end goal. Like, the end goal can be the mental space of what you've done with that time, even if that's having a nap or having, you know, just
which
going
Bally
for a
loves
walk.
to do. Like, Bally would get back so much time in his life if he didn't nap, but he likes napping.
I'm someone that really appreciates a nap because I feel that hour or so that I spend napping is worth it for the quality of the rest of the day that I'm going to have after that. Like, I just feel more energized. I feel fresher. So it's not that time doesn't feel wasted to me. And I think everyone just has their own ways of getting that mental space, whether it's watching some shit TV or going for a walk or anything. I think it's just important that everyone has their own way of finding that space.
Absolutely. So yeah, thanks for the email, Adam. Hopefully it's given you some kind of way to go with this, but you know, it's video games. Just enjoy what you're playing, man. Just enjoy what you're playing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right, our next email is from Acerbus on Discord. And he wants to preface this by saying, I'm going to use the terms gamers and non-gamers. You all know what I mean.
Yep.
In the Switch era, Nintendo has found great success by focusing on games for gamers. This is quite a radical contrast to the Nintendo of 15 years ago, who also found great success, but through almost the exact opposite philosophy with the touch generation strategy for Wii and DS. In light of the recent announcement of the Switch Lite, do you think we might see Nintendo start to reincorporate some of the touch generation's philosophy back into their software offerings? We know that they want to use the Switch Lite's cheaper price point to get multiple Switches in one household, but they are probably also banking on the cheaper price point as well as the positive buzz about the Switch in the mainstream ether to sell Switches to non-gamers. To that end, a return to franchises such as Brain Training or Nintendogs might in fact be system sellers as they were for the DS Lite. Irrespective of how likely you think it is, do you think Nintendo should return some of their focus to the non-gamer market? Is it possible for the Switch to reach the lofty height of the Wii or the loftier height of the DS without tapping into the non-gamer market? The PS4's upcoming overtaking of the Wii in sales seems to indicate that a console made for the players can achieve those numbers, though I do wonder how many PS4s are used solely for FIFA and Netflix. A service.
So a little bit old, this email. So there are things he mentions like, it'd be good to have Brain Training on the Switch. Well, guess what? They announced
it's coming!
And the Switch Lite is obviously out at this point. But yes, I do think it's still interesting to discuss this, because I think that the Switch Lite, interestingly enough, isn't really positioned for non-gamers, just because the products they're now putting out there for that market, stuff like Ring Fit Adventure, require you to have a regular Switch, right? You need Joy-Cons, you need a television, you need a setup where you are plugging all these things in and doing this thing at home, and the Switch Lite just isn't built for that at all. So in some senses, its philosophy is kind of antithetical to that whole notion of the wider market that they are trying to get with something like Ring Fit Adventure. Now, of course, Brain Training is going to be on regular Switch and Switch Lite, whatever. You can play that game however you want, you know, sideways, upside down, you know, all the stuff they did with the DS with the book mode, and, you know, the screenshot they showed so far is just of someone holding, I think, a Switch Lite on its side. So it very much is leaning back into different ways to play the system while also just bringing back a known franchise that they have done before. I will say I am actually pretty astonished that Nintendogs hasn't made a return. I think that a system with a touchscreen, also now with motion controls where you could, you know, go to the park with them. You know, imagine Joy-Con Rumble holding a dog's leash. You know, it's just so obvious, like it smacks you in the face. Or going to the park and using your motion controls to throw a frisbee. It feels like it's too obvious in some ways. And obviously, you can replicate those actions on a touchscreen too, so you can play it handheld and it would work.
Did you see a little rant that Chris Scullion went on recently on Twitter?
Chris Scullion tends to go on a lot of rants, so I'm not sure which one.
He does go on a lot of rants. So yeah, Chris Scullion, formerly of Official Nintendo Magazine, he now runs his own website, Tired Old Hack, and he's kind of, his attitude is what what kind of describes his website.
Yeah, well, no, it's tongue in cheek, but
in maybe a harsh way. But he was making the point that when he was writing for O&M, so this is the heyday of the DS and the Wii, so many people would write in and say, "Oh, why are you why are you loving like Wii Fit and Nintendo so much? You need to write you need to love the more hardcore games more, because then Nintendo will make more hardcore games." And Chris Scullion was making the point that these are the same people who now, a decade or so later, are going, "Oh wow, Nintendo Labo is really innovative and really interesting, really cool. I'm so glad Nintendo are doing that." And I think kind of the point that Chris is making is that Nintendo haven't really changed in that they've always done or at least they've always attempted and released products that are designed to appeal to a more mainstream market. It's just that they've had very varying levels of success. Just on the Switch, we've had 1-2 Switch, I've now forgotten the name, Ring Fit Adventure,
yes,
and Nintendo Labo. Like, these are 3 video games which it's hard to argue are aimed solely at gamers, to use that not very great term, but people know what we mean.
But Cerbus uses gamers and non-gamers because it's a shorthand, and you know what he's talking about.
It is a shorthand, absolutely. And so I think that in a way, kind of the market might have dictated to Nintendo a bit, in the sense that, like, I don't think those things were less successful than Wii Sports and Nintendo's because they're necessarily considerably worse products. I just think that the Wii came at a time when I think there was a mainstream audience that was interested in something like that. I don't think that audience has necessarily gone away, but I think they're probably a bit, not maybe tired's the wrong word, but they've owned a Wii. They've played Wii Sports. They don't feel currently at this point in time to go out and buy a Ring Fit necessarily. I mean, maybe it's too early to tell, but the lack of success with 1-2 Switch, like, I appreciate maybe what Wii Sports is a better product than 1-2 Switch, but 1-2 Switch isn't like awful, and you could see that awful products have mainstream success all the time. It's like, it's not necessarily the quality of that game that was its success or failure. It's just that I think the market for that has changed, but I don't think Nintendo's ethos has necessarily changed too much.
Yeah, I think that they will still do weird things, right? And Ring Fit is just the perfect example of, they dropped this YouTube video with zero explanation of these people in a living room just pushing this ring and throwing it around.
I thought that was so clever, because the vacuum that it created for the internet to be like, what is this? What's on the screen?
Right, it's the mystery box. Like, it creates that idea of something that is unknown, and they throw it out there with zero explanation, which is clever. It's a clever marketing tactic, and I think it's worked, because I think people were pleasantly surprised, right? I think had they just gone out there and been like, Ring Fit Adventure is an RPG and use this thing, and people would have maybe been a bit more lukewarm on it. But I think the idea that they set expectations for like, this is just going to be another Wii Fit thing, isn't it? It's not really something I paid attention to. And then like, boom, it's an RPG as a fitness game. And then you're like, oh, whoa. So the steps there in someone's brain is actually programming them to see this thing, think it's going to be something not for them, and then be like, oh, this actually may actually be for me. So it's clever. And when you talk about those 3 products, right, Labo, Ring Fit Adventure, 1-2 Switch, all 3 of those are original Switch necessary. Like, you can't play those with the Switch Lite. So it's a strange thing, because on the one hand, you do have this product that is clearly aimed at a market that finds the price point too high. But that market is also a market that wants to play regular video games. It's a market that wants to play Pokemon. It wants to play Smash Brothers and Mario Kart. It wants to just get in on all the major Nintendo properties, which not necessarily includes stuff like brain training, right? Like, I'm sure there will be people who pick up Switch Lites who are like, oh, brain training, I remember that, and then they'll have some nostalgia for it, and they'll end up downloading it from the eShop. I think that we're also in an era where internet literacy and ability to buy products from a digital storefront is much higher than it used to be. So the Wii Shop, for example, I think it was some horrible statistic, like 25% of all Wiis are connected to the internet or something garbage like that, because the majority of people who own those systems, older people parents, whoever, they weren't set up to just connect a device. And in the intervening years, everyone's owned a mobile phone. People know how to connect to a Wi-Fi network now. And it's much easier of a process these days. Like, people know where to go in a menu to find a place where you connect to the internet. Therefore, they are now exposed to a much wider variety of games than just what is in Target or Walmart or whatever. So I think that is a big factor as well to take into consideration with a lot of these quote-unquote non-gamers who may be getting Switch Lites can be converted to people who play more traditional video games by the nature of having an expanded view of what video games can be or are. So yeah, it's interesting.
And like, should Nintendo return to the non-gamer market? I think Nintendo have actually really been dictated by the market, where the Wii was something they came up with, the market loved it, it sold fantastically well, and then the market got tired of it. So then when Nintendo wanted to push on with a similar idea with the Wii U, which was similar in some ways and very different in other ways, but in terms of like the marketing, the look of the system, it was very much, this is Wii Mark II. The public were tired of that concept by then. So I think that Nintendo have been dictated to in some ways when they now have the Switch, where you can argue there are more games aimed at gamers, but Nintendo will always be open to putting whatever system they're putting out at the time. They'll always put out stuff like the 1-2 Switch, like Ring Fit Adventure, that can appeal to a more mainstream audience, because I think there will be a point in time where there will be a much more interest from a mainstream audience. I think Nintendo just want to be ready for when that might happen, as much as I don't think that's going to happen for the foreseeable future, probably.
Yeah, it's I think that these offerings they've had so far have not necessarily been the sort of success that they saw from similar products in the Wii generation, right?
No.
1-2 Switch is not Wii Sports. Ring Fit Adventure looks cool, but I doubt it's going to see the same meteoric success that Wii Fit did.
No.
And Nintendo Labo seemed like it could potentially be an enormous hit, but ended up not being so. And I wonder why that is. I wonder if it is to do with the fact that a lot of the Switch-owning audience are actually more people who just want to play games like Mario Kart and Smash Brothers.
Yeah, I think that is the case. And I think since the Wii, people are mainstream people playing games are getting the games in very different places from when they were at the start of the Wii era, in terms of like tablet devices, smartphones. All the kids are playing Fortnite now. It's less about the Wii Sports and the more, like the video game industry is changing so drastically that trying to see something like a Ring Fit Adventure succeed, it's a harder market for that sort of thing. And where Nintendo are having success with the Switch is with a more traditional gamer market, because I think that's what people were crying out for after the Wii and Wii U. Like, it gotten to this point where like people wanted a system that had a more consistent level of high quality AAA Nintendo titles that were less aimed at the touch generation type.
Yeah, and if those people had paid attention, they would have seen that Nintendo was delivering a lot of those experiences on Wii U, but the Wii U just was so unappealing to people that they just passed it on by. And I think, yes, like, majority of the people playing Switches now, a lot of people who own Switches are also people who own a PS4 or own a PC or own a different games console. They are people who have not been with Nintendo for many years. Like, they probably played N64 when they were younger, but then the PS2 came out and they got that instead of a GameCube. And then, they got the 360 and then they got the PS4, and then Nintendo are suddenly back again. Like, they have these experiences that you can't miss out on Breath of the Wild. Like, it's one of those games that everyone's playing, you want to play it, and the system is appealing, it's handheld, it differentiates itself from the competition. You played Skyrim on 360, you love that game, and now you can take Skyrim on a plane. It's those types of people who've always played games but who had drifted away from Nintendo and now are back again because they have quality first-party offerings, but they also give you a bunch of third-party stuff that is of a high quality and is mainstream, right? Fortnite being on the Switch is actually enormous. Like, I think that was a huge boon for the system when that came out, because it meant for younger kids, for people who were just getting into games through Fortnite, the Switch is a great system to experience that on. And there won't be a lot of younger folks out there. Like, I think Switch Lite is actually, you will see a lot more people just buying that because their kid wants a device for Fortnite or a device for Minecraft,
and
right?
Pokemon.
The Switch and Pokemon. Switch is a system where you can play Skyrim, Minecraft, Mario, Zelda, Pokemon. Like, these are tentpoles, enormous, like Fortnite, tentpoles of modern video games.
They're the Wii Sports of like this decade currently.
Yes,
you know?
absolutely. And you cannot play down the fact, like, outside of one game that I think is enormous that should have been on Switch a long time ago, and I'll probably bring it up next segment, Grand Theft Auto 5. It's the one huge game that you can't play on Switch yet. But pretty much every other touchstone for this is a tentpole of video games as a medium is there. And that's way more impressive than what they had.
Pretty big
with
Sony
the Wii U.
exclusives, but I see what you're saying.
No, but I'm talking about a wider audience, right? Like, sure, God of War sells 10 million copies, but Minecraft sells 100 million. Fortnite is played by 200 million. You know, I'm talking about successes that are on another level.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think of the Sony exclusives, I don't even know what the best-selling one would be.
Probably Spider-Man, I think.
Spider-Man, yeah. And I mean, the gap between that and GTA 5 is going to be gargantuan. So
oh, right. GTA 5 is like 100 million, over 100 million. So, yeah, it's... the other thing he brings up is about the PS4, taking over the Wii sales. And I can, pretty confidently say that, yeah, I think PS4's numbers are inflated because of the Maddens and the FIFAs of the world, because of Call of Duty, right? There will always be an audience who only plays sports games, who only plays COD.
And a lot of them in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of them in the UK. My cousin being one of them. My cousin, he got a PS4 and I was really excited. I was like, oh, you can play all these games. I lent him Ratchet and Clank.
God of War and Spider-Man. And
I lent him Horizon. Yeah, I lent him Horizon and I lent him Ratchet and Clank. And like, I sat with him and like, we played both of them for a bit and I was like really excited about them. He seemed to enjoy them okay. And like, he, a couple of years went by and he wasn't playing any... Like, he played Fortnite religiously. Like, he was in that era when he was 12. Like, Fortnite, biggest thing in the world a couple of years ago. And now he doesn't, Fortnite's for kids. And, he's not into that anymore.
But he never got round to Horizon and Ratchet and Clank.
Well, he played some of them with me, and then I think he played them a few more times afterwards, but he doesn't download PS Plus games every month, even though he has PS Plus. He doesn't play anything else because his entire social world is built around FIFA. All of his friends play FIFA. They all play Ultimate Team. They all invest money into it. They all
what is
talk
an
about
Ultimate
it.
Team?
Don't even fucking ask. It's the reason. It's the reason EA has more money than God.
Right.
And so they have mobile apps where they get the stuff. He was talking to me the other day about how he's getting the Ultimate Edition, or he already got it now, is the Ultimate Edition of FIFA 20, where it's EA access, so you get it a week early, and you get all these points that you can get loads of cards with.
I don't care.
No, I talked to him about it because it fascinates me, and like, we are interested in the games industry, and I always like talking to people outside of our sphere who don't play other things, who just have a very narrow view of what video games are. And so I always ask him questions about it and like what this thing is and like how he feels about EA as a company and stuff like that, because he's on Reddit, like he hears about people hating EA and Battlefront microtransactions and loot boxes. There's an extent to which that gamer rage has become a thing that is mainstream in some senses that people like him will know about, and he watches YouTube videos and things like that, so there is a sphere there that you can argue can be kind of negative, and some of the people he watches not sure about, like questionable in some senses.
You mean wait, there are YouTubers out there who say questionable things?
Oh wow, Bally, no, clearly not. Just a perfect platform only for the truest of angels.
And there's millions of children out there following these people.
Oh my god. Yep. Yeah. No. What it's really amazing. So what I'm saying is that yes, the PS4 will have sold to so many people who just play FIFA and really don't care about anything else, and that's just a fact of life. Like you are always going to get people who are, they're dude bros, or they're people who just like sports and they want to be able to play some more sports on their own because they like sports and they follow players and they support football teams. And that's what he is. He's a huge football fan, so he plays FIFA. And that's fine. Like, that exists. It just means that not necessarily artificially inflating the number, but as an install base, there are, 80 million PS4s now? Their highest selling game on PS4 is Spider-Man with, 13 million or so. And that's a small fraction of a user base compared to Switch, which Nintendo tend to have a high attach rate and have, in the last couple of years, had a high attach rate with their systems because people who buy them buy games, and they buy a lot of games, and they buy them in bulk, right? Smash Brothers and Mario Kart verging now both on like 17, 18 million copies. And there are 40 million Switches sold. Like, that's almost a 50% attach rate.
We just passed 15 million in North America alone, I heard.
Right. Yeah. So, like, the attach rate on Switch is wild. It's really, really high.
And Pokemon's not out yet.
Exactly. And that's just going to balloon it even further. It's going to mean the Switch Lite sells even more. So I think we've kind of maybe veered away from the question to some degree, but I do think it's interesting to talk about. I do think it is... I don't think Nintendo comes back with a slogan like touch generations again. I think it's more, they are still in this mode of every now and again, they're going to put something out and see if it sticks.
I think they will eventually, but I think we're talking like a decade from now. I think we're too in the middle of a good thing that is very far from what their previous good thing was, I guess.
Potentially, yeah. And you also have to think about, right, from Nintendo's perspective, we put out 2 games at launch. One of them was, they put out a few games at launch, but the major ones, one is a minigame collection that was their bread and butter on Wii. One of them is a radical, huge, big budget open world game that redefines the genre. Which one was successful? The second one. So which games are going to be successful on this system? Ones that are like the second one. I imagine Skyrim has sold remarkably well on Switch. I imagine things like Assassin's Creed probably do okay. Not amazingly, but probably better than they would have done on a system like Wii U, just because I think there is a novelty for people to having an enormous thing, like an open world game, in what is practically a tablet.
Yeah.
And that's why traditional video games are doing so well in particular on this system, and why stuff like 1-2-Switch and Labo, and we'll see how numbers are for Ring Fit Adventure, but I highly doubt it's going to like blow things out of the water.
Yeah, I'm skeptical as well. Yeah,
it'll be like a million seller probably, but
I'm
that's
go
just
for 3
potentially. Yeah, but that is not where Nintendo is making their bank on Switch.
No,
their money is being made by Mario Kart and Smash Brothers and Breath of the Wild and Odyssey. Like that is core video games for them, and people are lapping them up. So, you know, in some senses, do they really need non-quote-unquote gamers when they have a lot of people who are lapsed Nintendo fans coming back and people who are maybe just getting into video games for the first time? I
think ultimately you need one of the two groups, and that's where the Wii U was such a flop, is that they weren't really appealing to either of those groups necessarily. The Wii obviously appealed to one, and the Switch is more or less appealing to the other, and it's kind of like...
The Wii U appealed to people like you and me who buy any Nintendo console sight unseen.
Who would blindly buy Nintendo no matter what.
Right, exactly, because that's just who we are and that's what we love, and we know we're going to get whatever experiences on them. So yeah.
Anyway, that was a very good question.
Fun conversation.
And I'm sure aspects of this conversation will continue into the next segment, because we're going to be talking about ports coming to Switch and have a little bit of a discussion. So we will be right back.
Alright everybody, welcome back to the final part of the puzzle podcast. It's part 3, and here we are, and we're going to discuss ports on the Switch. I think that it's safe to say, Bally, that the situation we are currently in with Nintendo Switch is something I wouldn't have dreamed of in my wildest imagination.
No.
When this system was first shown and announced and revealed.
I think when you think back to like the Wii and the GameCube, and they were both like considerably less power than their competitors, especially the Wii, less so the GameCube. And you'd say, oh, I wish they'd port, I don't know, this random game to the GameCube or the Wii. And the argument was often brought up, oh, but it's not powerful enough. The company would have to make a completely different version or like a down-resed version for that. And it's not worth their time, their money. Whereas now, like, you are seeing slightly lower scale, lower resed versions of games, and companies are feeling obliged to make a different version for Switch because it sells, and that
right,
is
the market
a
is
weird
there.
position. It's like that market pressure that just wasn't there before.
Exactly. Like, you look at a game like Breath of the Wild, and I think as important as that game is just generally, I think it's also important because I don't think you would have seen Skyrim, or I don't think you would have seen, well, the Wii U had Assassin's Creed games, but they repackaged some of those. Or I don't think you would have seen Witcher 3 is the major one right now happen if it wasn't for Nintendo potentially laying that groundwork with a big game that people have an appetite for. And that's the thing, right? Is because the Switch is a console more than any other right now that people buy, and then they continue to buy games for non-stop. Like, there is never a moment where someone isn't thinking about what's the next thing, what's the next thing, what's the next thing. And a lot of these games, there are also people out there who own other systems, maybe have the game on another system, but want to get it again. I think something like Minecraft or Skyrim are great examples of games that people will play forever, and as a result, it's so easy for Nintendo to go out there and be, but hey, now you can take it with you. And obviously that existed for something like Minecraft with iPad, but now you have a situation where it's an actual video game in terms of controls and stuff like that. Like, you're not using a touchscreen, which I understand for kids is not really a big deal because they'll get used to that, as we've mentioned many times in the past. But
they're growing up with the wrong habits. Right,
exactly. But with Witcher now happening on Switch, with Overwatch now happening on Switch, I think these two games in particular are bellwethers of where we have gotten to, the progress that has been made, and how it's happened over time. I want to see, like, why was it that this happened? When was the point at which the camel's back was broken and they decided all the third parties suddenly got onto Switch? Because it was relatively, like, remember that after that presentation in January in 2017 where we felt pretty lukewarm about the system and the presentation, and our thoughts about how it would do in terms of third-party ports and publishers coming on board, probably still pretty skeptical, right? Because it felt like they weren't necessarily leaning into the place they would need to attract that type of talent.
Like at that point we didn't know just the sheer number of indies that were going to be on the system from the first few months, and likewise there was that, it was quite a sudden build, and as you say, I'm trying to remember when it was, when
I think I can actually pinpoint
Doom came and stuff,
right. No, you hit the nail on the head. Doom is the game for me that when that gets announced, when that gets shown off, and yeah, it works. Like, it's not the best version of Doom, but you can play Doom on your Switch and it looks pretty fucking crazy. When that happened, that was the turning point for me where I was like, oh, this is different. Like, this is not like a previous Nintendo console. And granted, it seemed like Nintendo had fostered this relationship with Bethesda specifically because in the first reveal trailer for Switch, they showed Skyrim, right? So Bethesda were kind of already on board before anyone knew what the system was, and before Bethesda really knew what type of success the system would be. I think Bethesda are actually to be commended as a third-party publisher that put their neck on the line to say, we're going to commit to this console, see how it does, and I think it's paid in dividends for them, because in that first year, you had two of their biggest games of the current and previous generation get onto the system, and I imagine both did really well. I don't know how well Doom did, but I know that Skyrim is a game that obviously sells forever, and it still sells forever, and on Switch I imagine it sold incredibly well as a result of that. So I think that was the point at which the floodgates started to open, and then over time you begin to see all these other publishers come in and put their games on there. Now, the thing is that I don't think we are in that place where everything is coming to Switch still, because, you know, there are lots of current generation video games that just wouldn't work that well on the system. I think of stuff like Destiny or Division, or like all these big microtransaction fueled MMO-esque multiplayer shooters.
Apex Legends, yeah,
like Apex to some degree, but then Fortnite's on Switch. It is a different thing.
Yeah.
And I understand, like, there are concessions that can be made with a game that's more cartoony than one that is more realistic. And I think a lot of those games, your Ghost Recons of the world, your I don't know, there's lots of games, even something like Deus Ex, which
Jedi
was on
Fallen
Wii
Order
U.
coming out, for example, like that's a very intensive game.
Right, but also, similarly, The Witcher 3 is one of the most impressive visually and just anything video games, open world, all this stuff. It is an enormous game that looks fantastic on its highest settings on a PC, that is built specifically for modern hardware, and even the modern hardware, that is PlayStation 4 and Xbox, cannot run that game to its fullest potential. Like, even those systems struggle to even maintain 30 frames per second. So the very idea in my mind that they would put something like The Witcher 3 on Switch was just unfathomable. Like, it was an impossible task that couldn't be done, and if you did it, it would be so compromised that it would be unrecognizable. And yet, we have a version that, yes, looks pretty grubby. Like, I'm not going to lie, it looks pretty rough. That said, in handheld mode, you'll notice less of the discrepancy. And if you want to play this game that is one of the modern masterpieces of the generation, on a handheld, on a plane, you can do that now. And that, to me, is staggering. And that... It's not to say that any game could be put on Switch, because there certainly are games that I think wouldn't be able to come onto the system, but it certainly makes a gambit for it, right? And I think we're in a weird place because the new systems are coming out next year, and Switch already was underpowered. Once that transition...
That discrepancy will get bigger, right? And it's about what happens then.
Yes, so once that transition happens, how do Nintendo deal with it, right? Like, what are they going to do? Because they will start losing things like these types of games being brought over.
I think by the time that PlayStation 5 is out, there's every chance Switch will be up at like 40 million to 50 million units sold.
I mean, it's already close to 40, I believe.
Right, so by the time PS5's out, we could be at 50 to 60 in that case. And I think that's a number that is kind of impossible to avoid if you're developing games and you want to reach a wide audience. Like I said before, the market pressure of getting these ports onto the Switch is there. And if you can do it for Witcher 3, I think there will be the argument that even games that come out on PS5 and the Xbox sequel will, like, companies will be really tempted to like make a less high-res version for the Switch because they will want to reach that audience. Like, I think that could happen. But like we joked about Jedi Fallen Order just now, like,
yeah.
But I mean, I'm not saying it will happen or it might, but like, you could see like a Jedi Fallen Order being down-resed in some way and coming out like next year, or It's unlikely, but there's a chance.
So I think it's an interesting game to bring up because it's a game that's published by EA. And EA famously, when the Wii U was coming out... No, well, I mean, when the Wii U was coming out, EA came out on stage at E3 and there were like unprecedented partnership between EA and Nintendo. Big deal. You know, they announced a bunch of stuff. And that fucking fell through the roof, didn't it, after the Wii U just flopped on its face? So EA, I think, and Nintendo have a bit of a weird relationship at the current point in time. I think it's also a lot to do with Nintendo's general attitude towards microtransactions and a lot of industry bullshit that happens. That said, they very happily partake in it on the mobile side of things and are doing so gladly with Mario Kart Tour and with Animal Crossing. But I feel like when it comes to their consoles, they don't like to necessarily blemish them with things like that. But you know, they also have a lot of games coming to their system that now implement that stuff. Overwatch certainly has loot boxes. Fortnite has a bunch of microtransactions, and so does Dauntless, which is another game that's coming out. Lots of these free-to-play games are existing on the system. Warframe, another one. Like, there's loads of them out there. And so we're in a weird place with Nintendo's attitude towards that because it is kind of shifting to some degree as they get deeper into the mobile market. But EA and the way they do business is so focused around that stuff that it is to the point of avarice. Like, it is just, you know, calling EA greedy is to some degree one of the most understated things that you could say about that company. It is pretty much their entire identity at this point is just greed and capitalism over everything else. So I don't know, because EA have said they don't think that their games would sell well on Switch. But we also get to that point where it's the EA catch-22, where they're like, well, Mass Effect 3 didn't sell well on Wii U. And it's like, you motherfuckers, you put out the trilogy like a month later on the other system. Who's going to buy Mass Effect 3 on its own? A game, a franchise that is built around the idea that you have to have played all the other games before it to have all your choices carry through. Like, what just lunacy that they spout just boggles my mind. But I also don't know. I don't know if someone who plays FIFA, like my cousin, would get a Switch to play FIFA on, right? Because all he wants is to play FIFA, and he has a system to do that. Does FIFA do well enough on a Nintendo platform to where it is worth EA's while to put it on there? But I don't know.
Every time they release FIFA, to my knowledge, and there's a big thing that Chris Scullion talks a lot about because he's a big FIFA fan and a very big Nintendo fan.
Right.
He always says the version that they always make of FIFA is so god awful that it's never even a fair test that FIFA could do well.
That's the catch-22 that I talked about with Mass Effect. It's that EA say their games sell poorly, but in the first place they put out a game that was a bad game. So it's a frustrating thing to some degree from my perspective. Like, fuck off, EA, actually. Like, I don't want your games on this system. Most of them I don't really care about, and the few that I do care about are from a company that was recently bought, who previously were independent and have not gone wrong yet.
Who haven't lost their identity yet. Exactly.
Respawn still feel like Respawn to some degree, and I dare to God hope that EA doesn't take them out back and shoot them like they have done with so many other countless studios in the past. But who's to say that won't happen? Because I don't have confidence that it won't. So it's a situation wherein, yes, this is one of the games industry's biggest publishers. They make more money than God, and yet the Switch is a platform that they don't support despite its success, despite how well it is doing. It's a weird one, but you know, even stuff like Call of Duty isn't coming out on Switch, and they did attempt to put a Call of Duty on Wii U, I believe, in that first year. There was a Call of Duty release on the system. They did Call of Duty release on Wii, so we have seen this before, right? But when we saw it before on the Wii, it was very much, okay, here's the big boy version and here's the Wii version, right?
Yeah, it's just like, let's just dip our toe in the least effort possible, you know?
Well, sometimes it came with more interesting, different types of games. Like Dead Space is a great example. Dead Space was a huge franchise in the 360 generation on the other HD platforms, and then they made Dead Space Extraction for Wii, which was a railgun shooter where you're on rails and like you're using pointer motion controls. It was leveraging the strength of the system. But Switch is Switch is like at this weird middle ground where it's like powerful enough to where you can kind of squeeze in the actual game, and people, I think, are cross-platform enough at this point and wise enough to where if they've played a game on one system, they will know if it's a different experience on another, and they kind of want the same experience. So you do want to have Overwatch be the same as it is on the other platforms, or Witcher be the same, or Doom, or Wolfenstein, or all these other ports that have come over. And they really are full-fledged. Now, quality varies, right? And obviously we've had experiences with bad Switch ports, with good Switch ports. I don't know how many AAA, like, big third-party games you've played on Switch that aren't, aren't from Nintendo, essentially. Any big ones?
Like Rocket League, maybe.
Which, Rocket League's not a AAA game.
No.
It's an independent game.
It is an independent game.
But it is a good example of developers prioritizing one thing over another. That game looks significantly worse than it does on the other platforms.
Yeah.
But it runs at 60 frames per second. Quite honestly, that's the most important thing with Rocket League, is that it has a solid frame rate.
Right. And exactly. And because of that, it really doesn't bother me too much, because it is just car football. And like, you can see the cars, you can see the football, and the visual fidelity is not why you're playing that game necessarily, so it works. But I could imagine like a Wolfenstein or a Doom or something, where, not that I've played either of those games, but I can imagine the much more emphasis on the photorealism being more important to the gameplay in that sense.
Sure, like even Doom is demons and monsters, so
sure.
Photorealism might be a little bit, but yeah, I know where you're coming from, right? Like, Doom does have somewhat of an art style to it, but yeah, I would say Wolfenstein probably is more in the photoreal camp, because, hey, they're people. They are Nazis, but apparently they still are people. That's a debatable question, but yeah, and I think that there are definitely ports that have come out that I look at and I'm like, and I talk about this quite often on the show, where I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is just not okay. Like, you can't charge people money for something like this when it is this bad. I think probably the worst example on Switch is Ark Survival Evolved, which, look up some footage for that and you will want to tear your eyes out, because this is no exaggeration, looks like a fucking N64 game. Ooh. And like, people say that often as a derogatory thing, but I am not joking. Look up footage of that game. It defies belief how poorly optimized, how bad it looks. And, I'm not a fan of that style of game anyway. I think that the survival genre on PC and like a lot of those games look really bad in the first place. It's not like they don't have a good art style. They all look like asset flips, even though they're not. But that is a really bad example. But then you have stuff like Rime, which I played that before it came out because we got review code for it. And I was shouting from the rooftops, don't fucking buy this, because it is so bad. It's such an awful port. They haven't optimized it well, and they haven't put in the TLC that it deserves and is necessary for it. And it's interesting, because I've heard some conflicting things about things like Assassin's Creed on Switch as well. Yet I look at the Wii U and I'm like, well, you played Black Flag on Wii U, and aside from Havana and the nonsense frame rate going on there, like, that seemed like a pretty competent version of that game, right?
Yeah, like, it worked. There was a few drops here and there, but it's very playable, definitely.
Yeah, and so I wonder, when people talk about the problems with some of these older games coming to Switch, like, why do they perform worse than Wii U versions? Like, why is that happening? And is it because just the handheld nature of it, the development, area is just, it's very hard for them to make it more optimized without spending a bunch of time on it. Because really, the games that have come out that have been good, that have been excellent ports, are ones where you can sense that they definitely took their time with it and they wanted to make it good. Yeah. And they didn't just shit it out.
I don't know enough about video game development, but
we are just complete novices on this subject. We just gesticulate about it, but ding ding ding. Hello, editing NBZ here, just to correct myself because I was searching for a word and I couldn't find it. I said posticulate and gesticulate. Posticulate's not a word, and gesticulate means I'm waving my hands around in the air, which, to be fair, I do quite a good amount of while I'm podcasting anyway. It's just you can't see it because this is an audio format. The word I was searching for is postulate. So there you go. There's your word of the day, postulate. All right, back to the show. Ding, ding, ding.
What strikes me as unique, arguably, about the Switch, and maybe it's similar to the Wii U, but like it's outputting two different. The video game is outputting two different types of screen at any one time. It's like it's not doing two at the same time, but it's switching between the two seamlessly. So maybe there's a huge issue with the development and trying to make sure the image and the video game runs smoothly between flipping from 1080 to 720p and different screen size in the flick of a switch, you know?
Right, just getting a version that works in both areas, yeah.
Because often one is much better than the other, and normally it's the handheld is better than the home screen, like on a, what am I trying to say? Living room screen, a television screen, a docked, exactly. So, but sometimes I've heard that docked is better than handheld. You know, like it's weird.
So yeah, there are bad ports, there are good ports. I think one of the most recent ones that I look at and I'm like, how'd you fuck this up? Is Bloodstained. Like Bloodstained, it's a 2D Metroidvania.
Yeah.
Why is that game run so poorly? Is it to do with the engine? Like, I know it's an Unreal game, and I feel like there have been Unreal games on Switch before that have had issues too. And again, novice here, no fucking idea about how to make games, but I feel like there is something with Unreal games that they tend to sometimes not run so well on Switch, and I don't know why that is. I don't know what's to do with that, but I mean, Epic make Unreal, and Fortnite runs relatively well. I didn't talk about it in what we've been playing, but I jumped in after the whole Fortnite nonsense happened where they shut down the game and the internet lost their mind over it, and they did chapter 2. So I was like, sure, I'll update Fortnite on my Switch and jump in there, and that game runs pretty well. Like it's 30 FPS. It doesn't look as good, but for a big multiplayer game with 100 players on a map, I was pretty, surprised at how well it still works as an experience, if nothing else. So again, we can just go on all day about whether there is ways that people can fix this stuff. But I think ultimately, if you care about what you're making and you want to make it work on the Switch and be a good version so that people buy it, then you can do that, because Skyrim exists on the Switch, and Skyrim is one of the best. So here's the thing. Skyrim is one of those games that I heard for years and years about the problems with Bethesda games and them being buggy and messy all the time. And I was like, oh, this could be a disaster on this system because this is even less powerful and stuff like that. But what Iron Galaxy did with this port is nothing short of remarkable, because of 50 hours of play, I barely ran into any problems with it. Hardly any bugs whatsoever. And the few that do happen are mostly harmless ones. They're ones that make you chuckle, but that don't really ruin the game.
That's so funny, because Caroline just had and I said it on the show before, but she's had so many buggy issues with actually quite a few games now, and I'm starting to question the way she plays video games, because she was having
trying to break
issues,
games,
right? Even with Spyro on Switch and stuff, and almost every single game she plays, she'll just be like, oh, look at this, and it'll just be the character just flying through the sky or something. I'm like, what have you done? You should be a video game tester. This is pretty impressive, how you manage. And it was just the sheer quantity for a game like Skyrim, of the quantity of issues she was facing was every single play session. It was crazy.
That's really weird. Maybe I've just gotten lucky, but to me, it's pretty rock solid.
I just think we play games in a different way, perhaps, than...
Maybe, yeah.
I think that...
Because we know the boundaries, right? We know the limitations, and so we don't push on them, because we're like, well, I can't climb this because of this reason, and the texture clearly indicates that it's not an interactable object, and therefore I know not to go that way and find a different route. Whereas someone who is not versed in the language of games will be like, well, it looks like I can go there, so I'm going to just keep trying and trying and trying.
Yeah, exactly. But I critique Caroline's playing style at every level, in the sense that she grips controllers very, very tightly.
Oh wow!
And here's a crazy one. So when like her left thumb will just hover over an analog stick, and then when she needs to move somewhere, her thumb makes contact with an analog stick and then pulls back again. Like it doesn't rest on the analog stick.
Oh wow!
It's just like these quirks that the style of that she plays in. It's just very like, wow, how do you do that? Why do you do that? And I reckon it's linked maybe to some of the issues she faces, and like as you said, like that gaming culture.
Right, exactly. It's just, that's fascinating. That's real weird.
I mean, we should do a study on it sometime.
Yeah, I know there's a really good video that went up on YouTube recently, which is it's all about this guy, and he was giving games to his wife and getting her to play them without telling her anything at all about how anything worked whatsoever, and just observing how she like muddled her way through video games. Very good video. I think Rasputin is the channel. So with that said, maybe let's talk about some games that we think, hey, these should be on the Switch. Why aren't they on the Switch? Because that's what everybody does these days.
Yeah.
Throw some ideas out there about what type of experiences we think should be there that currently aren't. And the list is obviously running a lot shorter than it probably used to be because a lot of things are already on the Switch. Surprise, surprise. So do you want to throw any out there, Bally?
Portal.
Oh, yeah. You know fucking what? That is the one. 'Cause I was talking to you the other day and I was like, oh, there's this one I thought about in the gym that I was like, oh, why haven't they done that yet? That should be on the Switch.
I didn't expect such a reaction.
No, literally. That was the one I forgot about. And I'm like, fuck, I'm so glad.
So there's a game called like Bridge Builder or something, and there's actually a Portal version of that game on Switch.
Funny thing, I literally just downloaded that because it's on Game Pass.
Oh, weird. Okay.
So Portal Bridge Constructor Portal, I think.
Yeah, right. And it's themed around Portal, so yeah.
Yes, yeah. That's a great shout. Portal 1 and 2 would be really good choices. And it's interesting because like Valve are in such a weird place where people want them to make games, but all they do is fucking farm out hats for Dota and just take their 30% share of Steam games. Like Valve don't need to make video games anymore. They're set for life, really.
They're like Konami and Pachinko a little bit.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I feel like Konami are figuring out Pachinko business is drying up a little, so they are throwing. Well, I don't know. They're doing some video games. Have you had a look at that new Contra game at all? Seen any footage of that?
I saw like a little bit of the quick look on Giant Bomb, and I was, yeah. What happened there?
Boy, as people who are now newly fans of Contra, it would be cool to have a new Contra.
But hey, I mean, Blazing Chrome came out this year,
right?
So that was a cool thing. So
we basically got a new Contra this year, so fair enough.
A very good one.
Yes, great shout. Portal 1 and 2 would be excellent games, and it's interesting because Valve has done console stuff before. Like one of the famous things they did was, this is how I got my Steam account, is they in Portal 2 had a crossplay situation, one of the first crossplay situations where you could crossplay between Steam and PS3 with Portal 2. So someone could be playing on PC, someone playing on PS3, and you could co-op the game if you wanted to. And that's why I got a Steam account, because I was like, well, when I bought the PS3 version of Portal 2, you get a code in the box for the Steam version as well, so you can play with somebody else. And so that's how I ended up with a Steam account. It was weird. It's why my Steam account is PSN_LordNBZ, which really annoys me to this day. It's just like, why? Fuck, that was such a bad decision. I didn't realize, but hey, whatever.
I hate underscores so much.
Yeah, real bad. And you've never played either of these games.
I haven't, and they are sort of one of the games of the generation, well, the last generation, I guess. But a lot of people talk about Portal a lot, and it's a game I definitely should play at some point.
Oh yeah, it's a good one. Any more you've got?
I think that, I mean, so this is a game series we talked about on the most recent Patreon show, actually, but all like the Factor 5 Star Wars games, I just think all the space shooters I think are fantastic. And now knowing that Jedi Outcast, I was about to say Fallen Order, Jedi Outcast is it's now on Switch.
It is, yeah.
It opens just a can of worms of like, what other Star Wars games could they bring to Switch? Like, what are the rights situations behind all those games? And I just personally love the Factor 5 games. And then, although it's not Factor 5, I'd also love if they brought something back like Episode 1 Pod Racer, just because that's a great game.
Cool. I think that it is a crime that Castlevania Symphony of the Night is still not on a Nintendo platform. Like, what the fuck, man? How is that still a thing? It's mind-blowing to me. Obviously, that's an older game, but I do think that it's weird that with all these things happening on the system and just all the collections coming out, I wonder if, like, Konami have kind of made it clear that there might be other collections other than just the first Castlevania collection. That may be a second Castlevania collection, in which case they could put all the GBA DS games and Symphony of the Night together. That would work pretty well. But yeah, it's still mind-blowing that hasn't happened. And they put out that thing that was Rondo and Blood plus Symphony of the Night on PS4, and they didn't put it on Switch.
It's ready to go. Just do it.
Apparently, maybe Sony had something to do with that. So if it was a Sony-funded venture, then I'm not surprised that it didn't come across to Nintendo. But yeah, just real weird one. The obvious one is like GTA 5. Why is that not on the system yet? Rockstar have done stuff with Nintendo before. Famously, they did table tennis, and they did Bully was on Wii. They obviously had all the Chinatown Wars.
LA Noire.
They've got LA Noire on the system, right? And they did a bunch of Game Boy games back in the day too. But hey, man, it's the biggest game in the world. And as we kind of mentioned,
I like Red Dead 1.
Right, man. The thing with Red Dead is that, like, that's a game that they just don't want to put anywhere for some reason. It never got a PC release, even though Red Dead 2 now is getting a PC release. Yeah, I mean, GTA 5 and Red Dead 1 would be good shouts, whether Rockstar care enough, because again, Rockstar have more money than God. So do they need more? Probably. Like, that's late capitalism. We just need all the money, so might as well make a Switch version. But that's one which I think, like, in theory should be fine, because it's a previous generation open world game, and those have tended to work on the Switch so far. But there is something about GTA 5 in terms of the three protagonists all exist in the world at the same time, and when you switch between them, it does this thing where it, like, zooms out on the map and then finds the protagonist you're switching to, and then zooms back in onto them. Where, like, I don't know if Switch how AI and stuff would work in terms of that on Switch, and because they're all supposed to exist in the world at the same time, doing their own stuff, and you could run into each other. So
right.
Yeah, it's a weird one. There's quite a few previous generation series that I think just should be on the system, and for whatever reason aren't. The Mass Effect trilogy is a big one. Again, we talked about EA. That's a similar situation with a lot of EA games that they don't care about the Switch. They're not going to put it out. Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider, like, especially the first Tomb Raider, that game could easily run on the system. Like, it's an obvious one, real obvious. And then there is the Arkham trilogy.
I was going to say Arkham trilogy. Yeah, that's because those games are, like, on the Wii U. Like, one or two of them, I believe. And they even, like, the thing is, at the launch of the Wii U at E3, they had it's like the Batman with the blue,
right, man,
that's cuff things, punching,
armored edition.
There we go. And he was, like, armored in Wii U blue armor, essentially. Weird.
Yeah. Arkham City Armored Edition, a game that came out a year after the original on Wii U. What a boy, that was a thing. But, like, now the Arkham games would probably sell really well on Switch. They would do tremendously. So again, you know, that's another series that, like, Mass Effect 3 was on Wii U. Like, the Mass Effect trilogy could easily run on the Switch. All these games, we already have proof that in a previous generation, a Nintendo console could handle them. And theoretically, this system is more powerful, right? Like, there are situations that arise that may not make that the case, but it should be. And then there's, like, some personal ones for me, which is, like, Chibi Robo, man. The GameCube Chibi Robo. That's not third party. I don't know why I just brought that up, but I put that on my list as a game that needs to be on the system. Because I go into Kex every time and it's 90 quid, and I'm like, why is this? They put it up to 100 quid recently. It's 100 quid. It's like one of the most expensive things in the store, and I'm just looking at it and I'm like, Chibi Robo. The Last Story is the big one for me. The Wii game, The Last Story. They could do a nice HD version of that. They're remaking Xenoblade. Why not do this one as well? Just go the whole mile with Operation Rainfall games and complete it, because Lost Story is a game I've been waiting to play for so fucking long, and it is really expensive on Wii. It's so hard to find, so that's a big one. It'd be nice if Microsoft were like, Sakurai doesn't have to tell fans that they should play Banjo on Xbox. They can play Banjo on Switch if they ported over the Banjo HD games that they remastered on 360.
Like Rare Replay coming to Switch or something.
Oh, yeah, Rare Replay's another one, which is like, how has that not happened yet? Like, that could be huge.
Isn't that that would be one of the biggest signs to be like Microsoft and Nintendo working together? Here we go. You know?
I mean, we already have it, man. Cuphead and Ori and Banjo and Smash. Like, we're past that point. I think Rare Replay is a big shout for them to eventually put on Switch. I don't know when, but I certainly think it will happen.
Do you think Ori 2 will launch at the same time on Switch? Or are they going to
No.
are they going to do like a 3-4 month delay?
It'll probably be a year or something.
Yeah.
I do feel like they want that exclusivity when Ori comes out. I think they want to be like, Xbox and PC only, this is our game, buy it here, and then a year passes, stupid fuckers like me are like, oh, I want to buy it again on the Switch. If they launch it on Switch, I buy it once, right? I buy it on one platform and I don't buy it on the other.
Well, I was going to ask, like, is that the sort of game that wouldn't go to Game Pass?
No, it's going to be on Game Pass.
All right, well,
yeah.
then you wouldn't.
I don't need
formally buying it anyway.
Right. Well, I'll probably buy Ori. I don't know if Ori comes out on Switch. I might just like play it on Game Pass. But the thing is, like, Ori's one of those games. Like, yes, I can play it on Game Pass, but it's a game I want to own. Like, I want to always be able to play.
Yeah, I know what
that
you
game.
mean. Yeah.
It's a different thing with something like Gears 5, where Gears 5 comes out, and I'm like, I'll play through this and never look at it again, you know? And that is perfect for Game Pass. It's like, I'm done with it. There's no reason for me to go back to that game ever. So, yeah, it's a weird situation, but yeah, I think there's definitely enough on the system. For God's sake, we're all just complaining about how there's too many video games. So, you know, just asking for more is somewhat of a curse in some senses. But you know, we can still. No one's ever satiated in video games. Is the mantra, I think, is that
no.
You can never get fans to be truly happy.
It's just weird to think about the long periods of this podcast where we were covering the Wii U, and it was maybe the 2 or 3, maybe even 4 games in the entire year, and now we were just talking about our Game of the Year list, and like we've got a long ass list to get through this year,
yeah.
And that's just getting longer and longer every year we do this podcast with the Switch out. So it's weird that Nintendo have done such a 180 on where they were just generally, and I think third-party ports are a big sign of part of that change. Yeah,
for sure. They're definitely a good indicator of the health of the system and where it currently is. So, well done, third parties, for finally getting on board a system. They're not going to stay necessarily. Nintendo needs to keep making good consoles that people care about. Otherwise, they're all going to go away next generation. So they shouldn't rest on their laurels. You know, we've seen way too many times that the lead manufacturer comes out really badly the next generation because of, you know, thinking that they're too hot for everyone else, and you know, they trip and fall. So hopefully that won't happen, and Nintendo will continue to be smart about what they're doing. Yeah, so that's going to close us out for the show. Thanks for listening, everybody. It's been a fun time. Some good conversations here. Let's plug some things and get on out of here. Bally, we should probably thank our patrons for supporting the show.
Thank you to our 2 $10 tier patrons. They are Atari Alex and my fiancée Caroline. And thank you to all of our other patrons as well. Your support means everything, especially in these months where we're about to buy a lot of games quite near on release. So thank you so much for your support. It really helps fund those games that we talk about on the show ultimately. So thank you. Yeah,
you're going to get me to talk about a Pokemon game again. So, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So future I didn't think I'd be living in, but you know, they brought it to the UK, so got to represent. You know what I'm saying?
We should also say that we just did a Patreon episode, which
we did
came out a week ago. If you listen to this on the day it comes out, and that was a Patreon show, TNL Ranks, where we talked about our top 5 licensed video games of all time. So definitely check that out. You can download all 12 episodes of TNL Ranks. So that's now been going for 2 years, surprisingly.
Yeah.
You can download all 12 of those episodes for a couple of dollars. So, yeah, thank you for all your support.
Yeah, check that out. You can obviously find us in all places over the internet. We're on Twitter most of the time, just spouting nonsense, retweeting things, chatting about the video games of the world. And you can find me at Lord NBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm at Ballyman91, BALLYMAN91.
Great. And you can find the podcast Twitter at TNL Podcast, which has links to our Discord, our YouTube channel, all the things that we do, all the fun things. Yeah, we also have our email address, which Bally can plug one more time at the end of the show.
Plug. thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com.
Great. And also you can find us in lots of places. We're all over. If you have a podcasting app, we're probably on it. Just search for This Nintendo Life. You'll probably find us. Google us, I don't know. Fucking put us into Ask Jeeves, man. See if we come up on Ask Jeeves.
Ask Jeeves.
Yeah, Spotify, Stitcher, all the usual. So check us on there. And review us on iTunes, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Good thing to do. I don't know.
That's a good thing.
Please. Thanks. All right. Cheers. Bye. That's going to close us for the show. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Next time, Luigi will be out and we'll have played it for a while, I think. So
that's going to be a week or a weekend?
I'll be over a week. It'll be like a week and a half or something. So we'll have had a good time to put our teeth into a bit of Luigi. Excited for that. That'll be good. And then,
what about putting your teeth into a bit of Gooigi?
Oh man, I would love to put my teeth.
What do you think
into
Gooigi tastes of?
Oh, he tastes like a jelly baby, man. Like an apple. Here's the thing: green often is lime, and I really dislike that practice. I'm all about, sweets that are green apple and never lime, because what I bought the other day was Skittles, right? But I bought the Skittles that don't have the shell. They're like the chewy Skittles.
Weird.
And half this fucking bag of Skittles, let me tell you, they have orange, lemon, and lime. Of the 5 flavors, 3 of them are orange, lemon, and lime.
No.
And so I'm like, less than, majority of this bag is bad. This is a bad bag. Why did I buy this?
Do you remember when, remember that Christmas show Giant Bomb did, and they had to taste the Skittles with their eyes closed and work out?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Me and Caroline tried that. It's actually kind of hard.
Is it?
It's kind of, especially between orange and yellow, it's hard.
I think orange I could tell pretty easily, to be honest with you. But the others...
Give this game a go.
Look, man, my mum did a test on me, which was, she was like, oh, I got these, cheaper cornflakes, because we have a lot of people who stay, and so she's like, I'm just going to give them cheap cornflakes instead of proper cornflakes. So,
what if those people listen to this show, MBZ?
They don't fucking listen to this show.
That's what the cornflakes I'm getting.
So she was like, okay, I bet you can't tell the difference. So we did a taste test, and I am very resolute in being able to tell minute differences. And I was instantly told her that these are the fake ones. And she's very surprised. But I think that I'm pretty good at that stuff. So maybe I should try the Skittles thing.
Okay. I have tasted fake Weetabix before, and that was disastrous.
Yeah, no, it can be. It can be very disastrous.
That's one to look up if you're American. Weetabix.
Yep.
It's just cardboard.
Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you very soon in a couple of weeks' time with another show. Until then, bye-bye. The musical interludes used on today's show were The First Boss from Slay the Spire, copyright Megacrit Games 2019, and Between Heaven and Earth from Fire Emblem Three Houses, copyright Nintendo 2019.